Good afternoon. Members, we have substantive items as follows today. A briefing from departmental officials on the establishment of the Equality and Good Relations Commission. Then officials on the Executive's International Relations Strategy. And finally, Bright Start, the Executive's Programme for Affordable and Integrated Childcare. The committee office has received apologies from Brenda Hale. Any others to note? Members, on page 5 of your electronic pack, we have a request from Parenting NI who would like to brief us on goods, facilities and services legislation. Now, we're due to be briefed next week on this issue by the Commissioner for Children and Young People and the Equality Commission. On that basis, are you content that we ask Parenting NI to provide a written brief?
Yep.
Ahead of next week, thank you. And they're content to do that. Next page, page 6, an invitation from the Speaker. This is to a reception to launch an exhibition entitled In the Garden of Europe. It's 6:30, Wednesday the 2nd, next Wednesday, Great Hall. Members, please respond directly to the Speaker's office if they wish to attend. Page 8 is a copy of our current invitations. On Thursday next, the committee is hosting a lunch for the President and members of the European Economic and Social Committee, 12:45 in the members' dining room. Could members indicate at this stage if they're aware who can and cannot attend?
I have a committee meeting in Ballymena, so I just don't know.
Right. You aware of any of the colleagues?
I'm not sure.
I can't, Chair. I have something else on, and I'll be here that day, unfortunately.
I'm not sure yet at this point.
Okay.
I'll try and do it. I think I got an invite as Chair of the Regional Development Committee.
You would have, yeah.
What date did you say it was? Yeah.
That is next Thursday.
Thursday?
3rd.
I'll try and let you know.
Check with come back to you, Sean.
Okay, thank you. For your information, members, the Attorney-General has laid the following documents in the Business Office. Firstly, Human Rights Guidance for the Northern Ireland Prison Service, Conditions of Imprisonment, and Human Rights Guidance for the Public Prosecution Service. They are available in the Business Office to view. Next is item 3. You'll find a copy of the draft minutes of the meeting.
Chair, you off Chair's business?
Sorry.
I just thought maybe you could give us a report on your trip to America, what engagements you did on the Wednesday and what you did on the Thursday, or the Thursday and the Friday.
Thursday and the Friday. Thursday night, I represented the committee at the American Ireland Fund gala dinner, where the guest speaker was Vice President Joseph Biden. Friday morning was the Northern Ireland Bureau breakfast at the Willard Hotel. That was followed, so it's a bit of an eating fest, in fairness, followed by the Speaker's lunch on Capitol Hill, followed by the President's reception at the White House.
And did the clerk accompany you to all of those meetings?
Not to, and in the evening then there was a reception on behalf of the Irish government in another hotel. No, the clerk didn't have tickets for all the events, Jimmy.
Just, you had a good dinner anyway. You say it was a bit of an eating fest.
Well, it was a dinner followed by a breakfast, followed by a lunch, followed by a reception.
Right.
So, yes.
You'll be commended eating all that together.
One meal on top of the other.
Okay, thank you. Draft minutes, members, page 10 and thereafter in your pack. Are we content to agree the draft minutes to the 12th of March?
Agreed.
Thank you. Matters arising then at page 17, we have a response from the Department giving us clarification on a number of issues which arose when we last discussed the Social Investment Fund on the 19th of February, including news of statutory and business sector appointees onto the steering groups, also planning permission and expenditure profiling. Included at Annex A at page 20 is a list of the approved projects listed by zone. Are members content that's all the information that they requested?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think so. Page 26, we have a response from the Department providing further information on the assessment of individual needs following deferral of the individual needs review process by the Victims and Survivors Service. The Department is advising that in the interim they have replaced the individual needs review with a gateway needs review, remodelled and simplified version of the INR, which signposts individuals to available support. In the absence of comments, I take it we're content to note. Then to page 30, a response from the Department regarding our request. The Department considers bidding for advertising funding to promote awareness of available childcare support and provision. The Department's response indicates this is being taken forward by the Department of Health, Social Services and Public Safety and the Health and Social Care Board. But just also to note, members, we will be briefed on Bright Start later today, so that may be an opportunity to discuss further. Page 33 of your pack, we have a response from the Department giving further information on the respective definitions of good relations being used by the Executive and by the UK Government. The response highlights the only difference is that the statutory duty in Northern Ireland is to, quote, promote, but in the Equality Act it is to, quote, foster. Members will also note the Equality Act refers to, quote, protected characteristics. Again, we are having a briefing on the proposed Equality and Good Relations Commission, so we may wish to discuss that when the officials are with us. Page 36, the Department has responded to our request for future briefings provided by the Department to be in a similar format to the Department of Finance and Personnel's Spring Supplementary Estimate briefing paper. The response indicates the Department cannot provide this level of detail until the SSEs have been agreed following January monitoring each year. So Annex B, members, gives you an example of what detail the Department can provide. Any comments, or are you content to note the response? Page 39, a response from the Department giving us a copy of their consultation list, the consultation on good relations indicators. On page 61 is the list of outstanding issues. The clerk's been liaising with the Departmental Assembly Liaison Officer to expedite items on this list, particularly older ones. I think you'll note there's been quite a level of shrinkage down to 2 pages, and I think we commend the good work that's being done to clear out the backlog. Thank you very much. Next to correspondence, members, page 63, the Department advising us that the first phase of the public consultation on the sexual orientation strategy commenced on the 14th of March. It will end on 6th of June. A copy of the document is also attached. Page 78, an update from the Department regarding the Delivery Social Change for Children and Young People consultation. This outlines a number of consultation events and activities undertaken by officials since the committee was briefed on the 22nd of January. Consultation closes 31st of March. An analysis of responses should be with us in April. Page 83, correspondence from the Committee for Culture, Arts and Leisure to the Department in relation to its inquiry into inclusion in the arts of working class communities. Page 86, a copy of a response from the Department to the Committee for Employment and Learning regarding tackling the gender pay gap. Page 89, a copy of correspondence from the Committee for Finance and Personnel to all statutory committees regarding the Investment Strategy Project Delivery Portal. The Committee for Finance and Personnel have indicated that evidence from the Construction Employers Federation has identified shortcomings in the Executive's Investment Strategy Project Delivery Portal. The Employers Federation have provided evidence the information held on the portal can be incomplete, lacking in detail, unreliable and out of date. The committee have requested that committees raise the issue with their respective departments to ensure accurate and timely information will be provided on the portal as applicable. Any comments?
Yes, Chair, I was at a meeting with the CBI yesterday and the very same points were made. It was really not very helpful at all, not kept up to date and indeed vague in parts.
And is the consensus that it's just an administrative issue that's easily rectified?
I would guess, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? Or if not, are we content that we simply forward the Committee for Finance and Personnel correspondence to the Department for comment?
Great.
Thank you. Page 95, a copy of correspondence from the Committee for Enterprise, Trade and Investment to the Department regarding the Barroso Desk Officer reports. Next to tabled items, members, page 3 of your tabled pack, a response from the Strategic Investment Board regarding research carried out by themselves in support of the development of the childcare strategy. Members may wish to refer to it during the briefing on Bright Start later in this session. Page 9 of tabled packs, a response from the Commissioner for Victims and Survivors regarding psychological services and the Dungannon Outreach Centre. Yes.
Chair, I mean, in relation to the Dungannon Centre, I think it was Stephen that raised the matter initially, and I asked some questions about it. I think that's a disgraceful response, quite frankly. That there's an office up there, it's unmanned, it's an outreach office. We didn't know that. They weren't able to tell us that on the day that they were here. I think they would know it's not a manned office or whatever. The contact details on the VSS website are for dedicated front of house and client services teams who are then able to transfer calls. What does that tell you? And I mean, the last line where they said that the person was going along with forms, they've since apologised. How do they know many other people might have been in the same situation, going along there, maybe looking in the hope that they could speak to somebody, maybe in a fairly distressed state or whatever. So, I mean, I think that's just another part of appalling management in terms of that. And there's the issue also of an office that's, how often is it being used? What's it costing to have there in terms of rental, in terms of rates and everything else? Is it a cost-effective way to do business? I suspect probably not.
But before I comment, Stephen, I think you did bring up the issue.
Yes.
So
Sure.
obviously want to offer you the opportunity to comment.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, I endorse everything that Jimmy has said. You know, it's just not customer friendly, and I wonder as to the viability and the purpose for having it there. Quite honestly.
Stephen, am I right in saying the person you reported as having tried to engage with the office was told that it was closed over lunch hours?
That's correct. The person wanted to bring documentation from Fermanagh to the office and was told, rang up beforehand, was told that it was closed between 1 and 2 on a Friday for lunch. I think it was a Friday, and then arrived at 12:30 on the appointed day, and it was closed. The shutters were down.
So what they were told by telephone is contradicted by this, which says it doesn't have opening hours, set opening hours.
It's a joke.
I mean, I would take the view that if you have it, there's an office with a sign. If you're a victim or survivor and you happen across it, you think, aha, great. And then we're being told it doesn't have set opening hours, it's by appointment only. So somebody has to go on behalf of the VSS, open it up and staff it. Surely it would make more sense if you're making an appointment that the person from the VSS would go to somewhere that was convenient for the person who wanted an appointment, like maybe even go to their home.
Yeah.
I think it's actually more sinister than that, Chair, in that they were using it and were happy enough to use it as an outreach centre that was being used on a regular basis to this committee whenever we started to ask questions about it. They're quite, I think frankly they were trying to pull the wool over our eyes, and I think that's appalling.
Well, I must say my reaction when I read the letter was, why did they not tell us that in the oral session?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I wonder, did those who presented us on this issue know if, in fact, that day? Did they have the information? You know, are they so many tiers above that they have the clue what's going on down there? It seems that's the way it was to me. But.
Well, I get the sense that we're not content with this written response. So we will start asking some more questions as to why this is different from the impression we were given in the oral briefing. Happy enough to see that, Clark? Okay. As to the other point, Stephen, are you content in terms of the psychological services response?
Yes, I have no issue.
Okay, members content? Okay. Next, members, still in your table pack, page 13, we have correspondence from the Northern Ireland Ombudsman advising the outcome of a Court of Appeal decision. The Ombudsman highlights the judgment is significant as it concludes the Commissioner for Complaints is unable to recommend financial redress when maladministration has been identified, and is also unable to lay a special report in the Assembly when a person or body does not comply with recommendations. And the Ombudsman further advises the Office will be seeking leave of the Supreme Court to appeal the decision. Any comments, members, or are content to await the outcome of the process?
It's a grave development. I might even go further than that. It's a grave development that the Commissioner cannot lay a report or require compensation when there's been maladministration. But that note runs coach and horses through the Commissioner's powers and the law. So he's quite right. They'll leave to the Supreme Court. So I note that it's a very grave matter.
What does it? Questions. What
We
is the
got a
point?
copy of the judgment.
We can get
A
you
copy
one.
of the judgment.
Okay.
And ask who is the relevant authority for that? Is that OFMdFM, is it?
The Commissioner for Complaints order.
So it's OFM. Ask their views on it, because getting leave. If you don't get leave, well, first of all, let's see if they get leave. But then it's a long time before it gets to the Supreme Court. If they don't get leave, what's the remedy? They require new law, subject to reading the court judgment. So it's a very grave matter. And my own department, when I was in DOE, we were penalised, the single biggest payment for maladministration. The people down in Cavanagh gold mine, 5,000 to 2 applicants, 2 complainants. So it is pulling the rug from under the citizen.
Yeah, well, that does make a question. What is the point of having a commissioner if these powers are denied? But we are, of course, Alex, bringing forward our own legislation to combine the two offices.
So there could be an opportunity to remedy in there.
Yeah.
But should we not be saying to whoever that in drafting this bill, it may be wise to anticipate the need for clauses to address the issue identified in the High Court judgment, so that if the Supreme Court thing doesn't happen or isn't successful.
Yeah. The information's already been passed to the drafters, so they will look at it.
Is there not an opportunity, I don't know whether there is or not, I don't know the answer to this, for us to pass it back to the department and ask for an Attorney General view on it or something? No?
But that only invite them to join the Supreme Court.
I would say,
Mightn't help.
Leave it to the next Attorney General.
Gentlemen.
Just on that, is there any update from the? No update on that either.
No. But I mean, you're seriously suggesting we should ask the department for their thoughts on this?
I don't know whether. I mean, it is a serious matter. I agree with Mr. Atwood that it's a serious matter. I don't necessarily agree with his comments about the Attorney General, but that's not an argument for right now.
No, that's not fair.
At least I think it should be referred back to the department and say, look, have you viewed this, because it's a serious issue. I've had people who have got fairly substantial awards in relation to complaints that have been forwarded. I think all of us probably can say the same thing.
Yep.
So, if he can't award something, aggrieved people don't get any satisfaction at the end of the day.
What's the point? Yeah.
And if he can't lay a report to the Assembly?
Yeah.
But we'll write to the department. Okay, members, on to our first substantive session. It's agenda item 6, and it's a briefing from officials on progress in establishing the new Equality and Good Relations Commission. Back to your electronic packs, page 99 is the clerk's brief, and that includes the relevant extracts from Together Building a United Community Strategy Also, submission by the Committee on the Administration of Justice on the establishment of the new Commission. The Department has not provided any papers on this matter. So,
Thank you.
we're joined by Peter Robinson, Kerry Morrison and Fergus Devitt, and you're all very welcome.
Thank you.
Fergus,
Chair,
it's yours.
thanks very much. I'd just like to say a few introductory comments, please, and then open to queries and questions. Thanks very much for the opportunity to brief the committee today on the establishment of the Equality and Good Relations Commission. The Together Building a United Community Strategy for Good Relations, as you know, was published in May 2013 and reflects the Executive's commitment to improving good relations and continuing the journey towards a more united, shared and reconciled society. It outlines how the Government will not only be challenged in terms of both monitoring public authorities' performance against the statutory duties outlined in Section 75 of the Northern Ireland Act 1998 as at present, but also in its duties in promoting good relations. The strategy states that the best way to do this will be through an Equality and Good Relations Commission that will act as an independent, statutorily based organisation that provides policy, advice and a challenge to Government. The Commission will be underpinned by primary legislation which will amend the remit, roles and responsibilities of the current Equality Commission, incorporating into its remit additional good relations rules and responsibilities as detailed in the strategy. Those roles and responsibilities are advice and challenge to Government, research and evaluation on good relations issues, scrutiny of and challenge to the District Council Good Relations delivery programme, and a regional advisory role to individuals and groups working on good relations issues. In practice, these augmented functions will result in the Equality and Good Relations Commission fulfilling a range of statutory duties. The Commission will be instrumental in monitoring the Executive's performance and how all policies and spending decisions are proofed for good relations impacts. To this end, an augmented impact assessment will be developed that assesses the extent to which policies and other interventions contribute to meeting the objectives of the overarching strategy. The Commission will also have a role within the wider delivery architecture of the strategy. It will have a scrutiny role to play in achieving the mainstreaming of good relations considerations into the revised arrangements put in place by the strategy, and will also provide advice and guidance to district councils and will fulfil a role in terms of developing and assessing the effectiveness of the overall district council programme. The Commission will act independently but will be represented on the ministerial panel to reflect its challenge and advice function. The Commission will play a key role in ensuring that the ministerial panel has the most relevant information and research to both inform its work and to monitor progress. The Commission will additionally be tasked with monitoring the effectiveness and impact of the strategy and will be expected to draw upon the wide range of data and research that exists. The good relations indicators, along with other information gained through good relations audits at a district council level, academic studies and other surveys commissioned by the Executive, will be supplemented by the Equality and Good Relations Commission, developing a pool of information that is meaningful, relevant and measurable. The Commission will also work to ensure that government departments and agencies are sharing information and data to help inform good relations policy. The sharing of this information is critical to measuring the effectiveness of the Executive's efforts to build a united community across all aspects of life. It is intended that a bill to establish the Equality and Good Relations Commission will be introduced during the 14-15 financial year, in order that this element of the strategy can be delivered during the current legislative mandate. It is also intended that a 12-week public consultation will commence during spring 14, once ministers have agreed a draft bill and associated explanatory and financial memorandum. Based on the policy direction, officials have engaged with the Departmental Solicitor's Office and the Office of the Legislative Council. A draft bill is currently being produced by the Office of the Legislative Council based on the discussions to date, which will be submitted to ministers for agreement in the near future. When agreed, there will then be a public consultation. In addition, a transition board has been established to oversee the successful implementation of the Commission. It's chaired by Dennis McMahon, and the chairs of both the Community Relations Council and the Equality Commission are members. One of the key issues that we'll be taking forward is communication, particularly with staff in both organisations. Chair, we're happy to meet with and brief the committee when that would be helpful, particularly as part of the consultation phase. I'm happy to take any queries or questions.
Okay, thank you very much. Could I begin, Fergus, with just exploring a little further the timelines, you're talking about a 12-week consultation process in the spring.
Yes.
Obviously, April comes around next week.
Yeah.
Will it be completed by recess?
I suppose that depends on when it would commence. Clearly, if it doesn't start in advance sufficiently enough, then there's a scope to make it slightly longer, and that has happened, I know, previously with other consultations that maybe have to run over some of the summer period.
So that's fluid?
Well, it would be a minimum of 12 weeks. If it needs to be slightly longer, I'm sure we could consider that.
But in terms of a start date, it's still fluid.
The start date is still fluid because the draft bill has to be agreed by ministers. We're hopeful that will be completed quite soon, and then the consultation can start as soon as possible after that.
Would you consider having the consultation open over the summer?
Again, it depends on the timing. That has happened with consultations previously that have happened, but if that does happen, the convention usually is that the consultation period is extended slightly.
Can you tell me about consultation with key stakeholders to date that have helped inform your thinking about the public consultation?
Well, we have been working very closely with both the Community Relations Council and the Equality Commission because those are the two bodies that are mainly impacted by the legislation and the creation of the Commission. As I've mentioned, there's a transition board in place which chairs of both of those organisations are represented, and I know that they have been communicating with their own staff. Clearly, as part of the wider public consultation, that will provide an opportunity for other stakeholders who may have an interest in the legislation to give a comment. We're looking at it, Chair, as it's both the legislation and also there are issues around the establishment of the Commission itself as well, which may impact on staff. We're looking at it from both those angles.
What are the main concerns of the CRC?
Well, I think both organisations are looking to ensure that the Equality and Good Relations Commission is set up in such a way that it's able to fulfil the remit that's set out within the overall strategy. For the Community Relations Council, it certainly would have issues around staffing, for example, because some of the functions it currently carries out are envisaged as transferring over potentially to the Equality and Good Relations Commission. So there are issues there potentially around TUPE and issues like that that need to be taken into account.
And what about the Equality Commission?
Well, the Equality Commission is looking at this from a perspective, obviously, of its enhanced role. It will be taking on new functions, not just those transferring in from the CRC, but also functions that neither of those bodies carry out at the moment. So its Chief Executive is taking forward a piece of work to look at, if I can use the word, operationalising what the actual Commission might do and how that might be taken forward and what resources might be required to actually make sure the Commission is able to fulfil its remit.
You've discussed so far, if I might characterise it as such, sort of logistics of the two organisations merging into a new organisation or setting up a new organisation. But what about the concepts of equality and good relations? Because there's clearly a perception of at least a possibility of significant tension between the two concepts.
Well, I think that's something, Chair, that would potentially be addressed through the legislation. And as you're aware, we're not really able to get into the detail of what may or may not be contained in the legislation today because that still hasn't been considered by ministers. And I'm sure that's something that stakeholders will have a view on in terms of how the legislation is framed.
And earlier on, Fergus, we were discussing information from the Department with regard to the definitions of good relation used by the Executive and by UK Government. Can you comment on the fact that here we use the verb promote, whereas the Equality Act out of Westminster uses foster? Why the difference? Was there a conscious decision to use promote rather than foster?
I don't know the answer to that, Chair.
And promote just seems to me, as an observation again, you may not wish to comment, that to promote something as an output rather than an outcome. You know, I could go to the gates of Stormont and I could promote politics for 8 hours with no impact potentially on people passing. but it is an output that I spend 8 hours promoting politics. But if the verb was to advance, then that would be outcome-based rather than output-based.
Well, I think those are issues that individuals and organisations and stakeholders may have a view on in terms of what the legislation says, and there may well be scrutiny of individual words like that in terms of how people might want to interpret them.
But are these concepts being discussed at the moment by this board, by the CRC Equality Commission?
Well, they certainly have views, Chair, and we are engaged in a process with them of gaining their thinking around what the legislation may contain. You'll appreciate that there's a sensitivity around how and when we engage with those organisations in line with giving ministers the opportunity to help to shape the legislation to a certain point. But we're hopeful of successful engagement with both those organisations in the very near future around those issues.
A key area for the new Commission will be funding. I think the Together Building a United Community strategy sees a role in evaluating the impact of funding schemes, which will itself then inform future funding intentions. What more can you tell us about that work?
There's a review. One of the commitments set out in the strategy was to commission and undertake a review of good relations funding, and that work has started. It's been done in 2 phases by colleagues in the Strategic Investment Board. The first phase, which is coming to an end in the next few days, is looking at desk research around funding to date and evaluation of any programmes that either our department funds or other departments, Piece 3 for example, IFI programmes and others. The second phase then, which will take us into the summer, will look at recommendations for how good relations funding can be best administered in the future, including potentially structures for how that might best happen. It's not envisaged at this point in time that the Equality and Good Relations Commission will be handing out funding, if I can put it like that.
So its role will be an overview and recommendations of areas?
Its role is scrutiny and challenge and policy advice.
And the funding will come out of?
Well, that's what the funding review is looking at, how funding can best be channelled in the future. At the moment, some of that is channelled through the Community Relations Council. Some of it is channelled through our organisations like the International Fund for Ireland and Peace Funds. We ourselves, as a department, give out significant funding through a variety of funding mechanisms, and we're looking for recommendations as to how the overall funding that is available can best be used to implement the strategy.
So it's possibility, at least, that the department could become a more significant player in terms of allocating funds directly.
Well, the department already allocates significant funds. For example, we give over £3 million a year to district councils. We have a Central Good Relations Fund, we have a North Belfast Fund, we have a Contested Spaces Fund, so we are already there in terms of the amount of money that we handle, plus the money that we then give to the Community Relations Council. So all of that funding is being considered in terms of how best it can be used in the future.
What about the cost of setting up the new Commission?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, some of the functions that the Commission is going to take on will be existing functions currently carried out by the Community Relations Council, but inevitably there will be new functions that neither of the organisations are doing at the moment. And one of the areas of work that the Chief Executive of the Equality Commission has been asked to do is to look at the potential resourcing issue in the future in terms of any additional resources that might be needed to implement this.
Do you have a ballpark in mind? Do you think it's going to be a cost-neutral exercise? Is it going to cost the taxpayer?
I honestly don't know, Chair. I think it's too early to say.
So there's no strategic intent in terms of this must be cost-neutral, or?
No, I think there's a recognition within the strategy that there are new things to be done that aren't being done at present. For example, an enhanced equality assessment to become an equality and good relations assessment, the scrutiny role, for example, sitting on the ministerial panel, advising government, challenging government, advising on the district council programme. Those are all new functions. So you could imagine that there would potentially be an element of additional cost required. I just can't give an estimate of what that might look like.
And just to go back for a moment, Fergus, on the evaluating the impact of funding, particularly on good relations. Soft outcomes and sort of longitudinal studies will be required, will they not? Because some of these outputs and outcomes are not that tangible and don't come about that quickly.
That's right, Chair, and that's why we're also doing the work on the good relations indicators. They will be the mechanism through which the longitudinal work will be done to ensure that over time we can track the positive impacts not just of the funding but of the strategy and policy intent as well.
The Committee on the Administration of Justice have been, I think, quite active in terms of briefing and lobbying. Clearly been in touch with yourselves. How do you assess their concerns?
Well, clearly at this point in time, Chair, it would be wrong of me to comment on anything that the CAJ is saying on what might be contained in the legislation. Clearly the CAJ, along with other stakeholders, will have its opportunity to comment on the draft legislation when it goes out for consultation.
Okay. Members?
Yep.
Deputy Chair Chris Little.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for your update. The Equality Commission for Northern Ireland already monitors public authority performance against Northern Ireland Act Section 75 duty to promote the desirability of good relations. So what additional powers do you foresee being granted to a renamed Equality and Good Relations Commission?
I think part of the critical difference is that it'll have a range of statutory functions which it doesn't have at the moment, and those are what are going to be set out potentially within the draft legislation. It'll be setting out a range of issues that will be put into the overall remit of the Equality and Good Relations Commission. For example, to enforce and investigate as appropriate where there's a failure to comply with Section 75(2), which it doesn't have at the moment, to scrutinise and provide advice on action plans arising from the strategy, to commission research, to challenge district councils. So it will have a range of additional functions which it doesn't have at the moment.
Okay. How do you assess its performance so far in terms of monitoring public authority performance?
I'm not sure that that's a question for me to answer.
Why not?
Well, clearly the Equality Commission has a role to carry out a series of functions around this. I think it's fairly well recognised that, for example, equality impact assessments are now a well-established mechanism to allow a challenge function if that is needed. Public authorities are aware that that is part of what they are required to do. As to the overall impact or assessment of the Equality Commission, I think that's for others to comment on, Chris.
Okay. What way will an equality and good relations impact assessment differ from an equality impact assessment?
Well, that's one of the issues that the Chief Executive will be looking at in terms of what that actually looks like, how it would be given to organisations to complete, how it would be challenged, how it would be monitored and measured. I think it's just a bit early to say what might be contained in it, but obviously there would be elements in it that aren't there at the moment in an equality impact assessment.
What sort of public authorities and policies do you see that applying to?
Well, I imagine that it would apply to the same range of public authorities that are required to complete equality impact assessments at this point in time.
Okay. You mentioned the Good Relations Fund that OFMdFM currently has. It's around £3 billion a year to district councils.
Yeah.
What way is the use of that fund evaluated and reported on?
There has been a fairly recent evaluation of that, and it has helped us to shape the funding for 14-15 year and allowed us to tie it much more into the delivery of the strategy. Moving forward, we want to do that in an even more close way to ensure that district councils are delivering on ministers' requirements for good relations and what is set out within the strategy. And that will also be a role for the Commission as well, to advise on what the good relations elements of District Council's action plans might contain and to scrutinise those.
And is that evaluation publicly available?
I can check for you.
Okay, yep, that'd be helpful.
Yeah.
One last question. Chair, the Community Relations Council obviously has a long-standing role in relation to research, challenge, scrutiny and funding delivery of community relations work on the ground.
Yeah.
What role do you foresee the Community Relations Council playing going forward?
Well, part of that will be for the board of the Community Relations Council itself to determine. There are certain functions, as I mentioned earlier, that under the strategy are envisaged as transferring across to the Equality and Good Relations Commission. The functions that are left will be determined by the board of the Community Relations Council. It certainly envisages that the Equality and Good Relations Commission will have a remit and role around research and best practice.
Well, what would you? Sorry, final question, Chair. What would you say to practitioners on the ground who would argue that for a body to award funding effectively, that they need to be closely linked to that best practice and that research in the way that the Community Relations Council was?
Well, I think that's certainly one viewpoint. I think there's, however, an issue about a funding body also, in theory, providing a challenge and policy advice role, and that's part of the rationale as to why the policy and advice and challenge functions are moving to an Equality and Good Relations Commission and not the funding.
Okay, thanks, Chair.
Any other members?
Yeah.
Thank you. You're here. First of all, I don't think there's many questions I can really ask because the presentation has basically been a rehearsal of what's in the book, which we knew already. Save the points you made at the end about issues of process around a transition board and the like. So there's not that many questions, I think, arising from the presentation, and I don't really expect you to comment on this because you are an official taking forward decisions taken by ministers, but I do think we're going in the wrong way, that we'll certainly be opposing the proposed merger of these two organisations, and we do so for a number of reasons. The first is that I think it was the last meeting of this committee, Dennis McMahon gave evidence, maybe 2 or 3 meetings ago now, gave evidence that when OFMdFM was working to assist and bring about the creation of the VSS, was Dennis's evidence to this committee that in that regard what he really concentrated upon was financial governance. Yet when the Victims Commissioner submitted her report to OFMdFM, one of the areas where she was most critical was about financial governance, and made some quite strident remarks about what was not in place and about the weaknesses of all of that. So Dennis McMahon chairing the transition board to bring about a merger of an organisation when, and it's not an issue about Dennis, it's just an issue about, because I know Dennis and he's a good official, it is that I don't have confidence in OFMdFM being able to do this right, because the VSS demonstrates that OFMdFM didn't get it right. And therefore I have doubts about the capacity of OFMdFM to do this, given what we have concluded from what happened around the VSS. I also think it's not the right thing to do to merge these organisations. And the reason I think that is that, in my view, the Equality Commission has more and more become rudderless and lacking strategic direction. And to have now a super organisation, in my view, runs the risk of compounding the problem of an institution that has a very powerful role, but is not, in my view, measuring up in that role. That's why I thought your answer to the Deputy Chair's question was a bit strange in relation to It was for others to comment, which is what you said, about how the Equality Commission was in one or other dysfunctions. I don't think it is for others to comment. I think it is for OFMdFM to comment, because you fund that body. You have legal responsibility in terms of accountability for that body, and I think you should have a view about what that body is or is not doing. So I just think that OFMdFM should look at what we have learned from the management of the VSS and think again about whether there is the internal capacity to do this well, and to learn from the VSS that if you concentrate all resources in one place, you don't necessarily have the best outcome. And that's going to be the structural, fundamental problem about this approach. Although I think I know the question, has there been any discussion in OFMdFM about resourcing this new body in terms of what the financial resources for? I note what you said about keeping the staff involved and all that informed, but has there been any discussion about what the financial profile of this new organisation might be? Given that you said that you expected sign-off on the legislation quite soon and in the near future, can you be any more precise about that? Like, presumably you had conversations with the ministers in advance of this meeting. Do you think that is coming, in the next weeks, or is it more than that? In which case, how confident can you be, given the scale of legislation that's meant to come to the floor of the Assembly over the next 18 months, that there's any realistic prospect for this bill getting to the floor and getting through the Assembly in the next 18 months? Because all the evidence is that, and this is not a criticism of this government, it's just an observation in every government, all legislation tends to get concentrated at the end of the mandate rather than the early years of the mandate. That's going to be the experience of this Assembly, as was the experience of the last mandate. So those are my two questions. Anything on resources? 3 questions. Are we now in the arena of wishful thinking when it comes to getting this bill passed? And is there any conversation going on in OFMdFM about, is this really the right thing to do?
Okay, there's a few queries and questions, and then I'll try and address them all. And if I miss some, if you, I think 23, if you let me know. First of all, in relation to the Transition Board, the chairs of both the Community Relations Council and the Equality Commission are on that Transition Board. So I think that should give some assurance around the involvement of those organisations in the work that is being taken forward. You said on a couple of occasions the proposed merger. I should make clear it's not a proposed merger. Some of the functions that the Community Relations Council currently carries out will be transferring across. It's not envisaged as a merger. In terms of resourcing, certainly that is an issue that has come up and has been discussed at the Transition Board. As I mentioned to the Chair, it's too early to try and determine what exactly those resourcing requirements might be, but we are aware that we are asking the Equality Commission to take on additional functions, not just the ones that it may be taking on from the Community Relations Council. And in relation to the legislation, our proposed timetable certainly sees the legislation as being completed within the legislative mandate.
Well, that didn't really answer the question. What does quite soon in the near future mean? Like, you must have some sense from your own ministers about what quite soon in the near future might mean.
In terms of the legislation?
Yes, the legislation being released and the consultation beginning, because the Chair made a fair point about how this is all going to come crashing into the summer, and then you are running against time in terms of getting this through all its stages in the Assembly.
Yeah, well, our best estimate, if I can answer it this way, our best estimate at this point in time is that the legislation should be available for public consultation within a short number of weeks from here.
Well, a short number of weeks could be whatever you want yourself. Remember, it's going to be PERDA in 4 weeks' time.
Yes.
So you lose May.
Yeah, and we are looking at the official guidance on the pre-election period in terms of public consultation. and how that might impact on any public consultation.
Sorry, what's that telling you?
It's telling us that there's a possibility that we may be able to go out for consultation during that period. We're just waiting for final clarification around it.
What about the question of, given the VSS experience, which everybody I think has concluded hasn't been a very happy one, and which I'm sure that you've watched very closely, does that not suggest to you to caution yourselves, and officials to caution yourselves, and everybody to caution themselves, that to go with, let's put it this way, the partial merger of organisations, because they've taken function from one to the other, there's certainly a level of merger, to say, well, actually, is that the right approach to this issue? And do you have any comment upon the authority of the Equality Commission, which, as I say, I consider to become rudderless?
Well, I can answer the first question. Certainly, in terms of the establishment of the Equality and Good Relations Commission, the fact, as I mentioned, that both chairs of the Community Relations Council and the Equality Commission are on the transition board, and it's clear from the Together Building United Community strategy that it is set out that is what ministers intend, is the creation of the Equality and Good Relations Commission. Having both of those chairs in at the start of the process should give reassurance around what the final commission is going to be able to do in terms of how it can fulfil its remit.
Thank you.
Leslie Cree.
Thanks, Chair. Alex has covered some of the points, but what's left of the Community Relations Council, is that sustainable? I mean, has thought been given to that?
Thought is certainly being given to it. It, in broad terms, at the moment has three roles. One is funding and development work, one is policy, and one is a challenge type function to government. It's envisaged really that two of those will, if you like, slide across to the Equality and Good Relations Commission, which would leave the funding and potentially funding stroke development not moving across. It links to the funding review that I mentioned to the Chair earlier in terms of how good relations funding in its entirety is going to be taken forward in the future. But certainly the strategy itself acknowledges that there are potential implications for the Community Relations Council as a result of the creation of the Equality and Good Relations Commission.
That sort of thing's probably addressed sooner rather than later, though.
Well, and that's why the chair of the Community Relations Council is built into the process from the start.
Okay. And the second point, the sexual orientation strategy is going to be put back, is that right?
I don't have the detail of that.
Because of Together? No.
I had understood that there's a pre-consultation exercise has already commenced on the sexual orientation strategy.
Okay, thanks.
George Robinson.
Chair, all my questions have been answered. So.
Okay. So, in conclusion, Fergus, in terms of the three functions you've been describing, to transfer to the new council, funding, commissions. Funding, I'm now more convinced than ever, is going to rest with the department, unless you set up another body.
Well, as I've said already, Chair, we already have our own funding streams and yes, give out significant amounts of funding. The Community Relations Council, the work that they do is, some of it is core funding, but some of it also is funding that allows a quick response, for example, to specific issues at particular points in time. One of the issues that we're looking at through a review of funding of good relations is how we can get that balance between longer term, more strategic funding interventions and the ability for flexibility and short, sharp interventions where that is required at particular points in time or in geographical locations. And we're trying to work out how that best can be done. You may say, you know, government might potentially be good at one of those, which is a longer term, but not necessarily good at having the flexibility to intervene quickly. But trying to work out how that balance can be achieved through any structures that might be set up in the future. It is set out in the strategy that there's potential for funding to be given out on a thematic basis, which would tie in with the themes set out in the strategy, such as our safe community, children and young people, our cultural expression. That's something that this review of funding will look at.
And finally, do you accept that at times good relations and equality can be mutually exclusive?
Well, I think that's one of the issues that we are expecting to come through the public consultation on the legislation, in terms of people's views on that and how those two issues sit together. It's something we're expecting.
Okay. Thank you very much. Kerry, Peter. Okay. All right. Thank you very much indeed. Members, if the next election is put back to 2016, that leaves 26 months. By the sound of it, they could easily take up 6 on this consultation, leaving 20 months to assess it, draw up the legislation and get it through. Doable?
Like a lot of these things, Chair, I think it's a movable feast.
Probably tight enough. Okay. Next, members, item 7 is the international relations strategy from the executive. Page 107 has the clerk's brief, including detail of the 6 objectives to support the strategic aims of this strategy. And the strategy itself is at page 109. And we are joined by Debbie Sweeney and Tim Losty. Tim, are you batting with the opening remarks?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd just like to thank the committee again for the opportunity to come along and talking a bit more detail about the Executive's International Relations Strategy. I know that the committee wrote to us some time ago and asked us to come up at an earlier meeting, but we wanted to wait until we got the executive paper approved. The executive strategy, it's important to stress it is a high-level strategy, and it complements and cooperates with the work of the other departments and other organisations. It also builds on the significant international relations activity that we've experienced here over the last couple of years with the G8, the World Police and Fire Games, the City of Culture, and with the Global India Conference. It also builds on a lot of the work that we've been involved in over the years in terms of the visit programmes that Debbie we've been managing. We've had high-level visits from Japan, from China, Brazil, Spain, Croatia. These high-level visits, we would average about 30 a year, and they're usually an ambassador or senior political figures from those governments. Our ministers also have been involved in a number of significant international events, including visits overseas to, more recently, Japan, to China, to the United States, India, and also to the Middle East. And we're starting to see a lot of the positive developments from those visits. So there has been significant international activity. There's also been a lot of international activity in other departments and in other organisations. And from our experience, one of the things that we needed to do to get a strategy together was to coordinate and join up government a lot more in relation to not just how we cooperate on international activities coming in, but also how we build on the connections and relationships that we have made from those international visits. As I said at the outset, it's a high-level strategy. It works with the other organisations, with InvestNI, and we also work closely with the Assembly's outreach team here. We work with the universities and with the likes of NICO. We want to see the strategy developing a joint approach to achieve our mutual international objectives and complement the other strategies of the other organisations. It will also ensure that some of the contacts that we make individually through some of these visits and some of the outputs from those visits are shared with other organisations, so that we're better able to capitalise on a lot of those international visits. As a result of the strategy also, we will be looking to develop an international relations action plan, which will clearly target regions and organisations that will be identified that will help us achieve our objectives under the programme for government. We will liaise with other departments on a more regular basis. We will also liaise on a regular basis with the Assembly here and with other organisations. And we will build on the connections that we've made with the Council and Honorary Council networks in Northern Ireland. Ministers also have announced the intention to open a Northern Ireland Executive Office in Beijing, and plans to open that sometime later this year, we're hoping in the autumn. And plans are progressing there. There's been a number of discussions with the Foreign Office, the embassies in Beijing, and also with the Chinese government. So we are making progress on that. We may come back to the committee at a later stage to provide an update. So that's a very brief overview of some of the activities, and we're happy to take any questions.
Okay, thank you very much. You mentioned partnership working with a number of organisations, Tim, but now, if I'm correct, I don't think you mentioned the Northern Ireland Tourist Board or Tourism Ireland. Is there a role for either?
Sorry, if I didn't mention, it was just for the brevity of the introduction. They are detailed in the strategy and also in the action plan. We would be working very closely with tourist boards. Increasing the number of tourists here is one of the primary objectives.
I see it build international connections in culture, art, sport and entertainment.
Yeah.
The Beijing office has a location, and a physical office been identified, do you know?
It'll take a while to get the actual physical office established, because once we are accredited over there, we then have to make an application to the protocol department in the Chinese government, and sometimes that can take up to 12 months to get the agreement. But Debbie was in Beijing recently, and we've narrowed down a number of the options where we will have a short-term facility, which will then enable the officer going over there to identify the office that we want for a longer-term period. So we will have a physical office when we open the Beijing office later this year.
And that will complement the Office of the Executive in Brussels, and we have the Bureau in the States. Are they all shadows of each other, or are they mirror images, or are you learning from one to build the next?
There will be a lot of similarities in terms of how they will be structured and how they will operate. The intention would be that all offices will be very proactive and operate almost like a development agency, going out to sell a lot of the things that we are good at here and make contacts with organisations and individuals that will be of benefit to us. But they will operate within the sort of international environment which they're housed, so they have to acclimatise to that local culture, the way of doing things, the way governments operate, and also the sort of networks that would exist there. The US office, I was there for some time. We have some strong networks there that we can build on. We also have some strong relationships with organisations and with states there. The Brussels office has very strong connections with a lot of the EU departments and organisations. It will also be developing closer connections with European countries. In the China office, we're starting off from a small base of our contacts and connections and knowledge of what we're about. So we will be spending a lot of time raising awareness and promoting what we're capable of doing. So there will be similarities, but they will be tailored. The offices will be tailored to the environment that they're operating in.
Does this strategy envisage any changes for the office in Brussels?
Each office will have responsibility for their own strategies, and those strategies, people will be developing them to reflect the future operating environment there. We also want to build on a lot of the good connections that have been made because of the international relations activities here. G8 was very successful for us. We had a number of visits from the embassies in France, Germany, Russia, Italy. So our offices and our people will be trying to strengthen relationships with those countries.
In terms of the Brussels office again, Tim, and obviously Barroso's been around for a while, but we don't anticipate it will be with us forever. Does the strategy look at the post-Barroso task force era?
Well, the international relations strategy here is the high-level strategy, which will then encourage the Northern Ireland Bureau in Washington and the Office of the Executive in Brussels to develop their strategies to meet the future operating environments there. And that will include where there are changes in the government and the heads of departments, as well as the priority themes that may be identified in Europe under the 2020 plan, and also what government here may decide as the priorities under the next programme for government. So those individual plans must reflect those.
And there'll be specific strategies then devolved for a USA strategy, a Canadian strategy, specific BRIC nations strategies? The implementation plans is perhaps...
Each of the offices will have their strategies for the areas that they will be operating in. So the Bureau has a strategy for North America. The officer who will be responsible for opening the office in China will also develop a strategy for China, possibly also for wider in Southeast Asia.
Is this high-end strategy then, do you think in some sense you're reinventing the wheel, or are you simply coordinating what's already happening on the ground in these various countries?
Well, when I look at the strategy, it's not that it's something that's completely new and people would look at it and say we've never done that before. I think it's important to build on a lot of the success that we've had, not just in government but in the other organisations. It's sharing that information, it's joining up government, and it's taking a much more proactive approach to promoting a more positive image and to being proactive about developing relationships and building on those relationships internationally. As I said, we get a lot of visits here. People come in, they have a look at the place. There's some follow-up with those, but I don't think that we've really capitalised on those connections in the past, and that's something that we hope to do under this strategy.
George Robinson.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks to Tim and partner. My question would be about the strategy used to all departments to ensure unanimity of presentation of Northern Ireland abroad.
Yeah, one of the things that we will be working on with colleagues is to develop a kind of a corporate message. What are the key sales points that we want to get across when people are visiting overseas or when we have overseas visitors here? So there will be key messages. Now, each department, each organisation will have their own specific message that they want to get across. But we want to make sure that we have that common corporate message about our economy, our education system, the tourism product that we have to offer, and some of the other issues that we have here that would help to attract people over, and also to enhance our credibility overseas. There's a lot of things that I think that we're very good at here, that we're maybe not very good at selling ourselves abroad, so we hope this strategy will start to address that.
Just from the two ministers' point of view, OFMdFM, I think they're doing a wonderful job and been out forward to attract as much inward investment as possible to Northern Ireland, and officials as well. They're doing a very, very, very good job. I'd like to commend them from my point of view.
Thank you. Leslie Cree.
Tim, I was intrigued there by the last few comments you made in response to the chairman. I was in Brussels with the Assembly and Business Trust recently, and we were informed by the Irish delegation there that the secret here is to get in on the ground when things are being thought about. Because if you wait until a white paper is produced, it's invariably too late. So we went, and bearing in mind with business people, we asked the same question of our own team. And we were told, well, as soon as we get the white paper, we get going on it. So it's really, I think, the point you were about to make there. It's very important to have the right sort of relations with people on the ground. But we've got to change some of the mindsets. You know, that means actually going out and pushing yourself rather than sort of reticently sitting there waiting on something to happen. Can you give us any encouragement that's going to improve?
Yes, well, if we put in the context also that as a devolved administration, we adhere to UK government as having the main area of responsibility for foreign policy. But where there are areas that are devolved to us here, we do have that role and responsibility to try and get in the ground floor and help to shape policies that will then impact on us. And that is about building the networks, being proactive, being a bit more aggressive in getting our messages out there. In Washington, in Brussels, in Beijing, in Tokyo and other key places, with regard to international relations, it's a very competitive environment where you have many countries and many regions trying to get their face in front of people, the decision makers. And we have to play that game now, and we have to get in a lot sooner.
Thanks.
Jimmy Spratt.
Thank you, Chair. Just a couple of brief points. Tim, in terms of the work ongoing, I noticed that agri-foods is mentioned in issues of trade and research in America, and Invest Northern Ireland are doing work. What is the ongoing promotion in terms of, obviously, agri-food is one of our growth industries on a yearly basis? In terms of, I think round about last figure I heard was around about 8% or something a year. Just the second thing is in terms of Canada and the Washington Bureau promoting in North America, given that's one of the promotion areas, a Canadian strategy. Is there not already a strategy with Canada? I mean, it sounds to me that Canada would be one of our fairly strategic partners in terms of, certainly from a tourism point of view, and given the amount of people from the island that actually live in Canada today. So what work is presently being done, and what work will continue or be increased in terms of promoting that North American line?
First of all, in relation to agri-foods, I mean, that is one of the international success stories that we have in terms of the products. Invest NI and DARD are very heavily engaged in the promotion of that sector. And our ministers, First and Deputy First Minister, have they've gone on a number of the overseas visits with the particular aim of promoting agri-foods, particularly in China and in Japan and that, where there's the issue of getting the accreditation, getting the checks and all the inspections sorted out so that our products can be sold more widely into those markets. So our ministers will go in and spearhead the operations, and DARD and Invest NI will back that up. So sometimes getting the product from where you've made people interested to actually getting the product into the door and onto the shelves and out to the consumer, sometimes that can take some time. But it's something that all the departments and OFMdFM are working on, and we've had very positive feedback from all the people we've been talking to in relation to the agri-food, so we do see that increasing a lot more in the future. In relation to Canada, the Northern Ireland Bureau has had a Canadian strategy, and that has included our ministers going on visits to a number of the Canadian provinces. And that will again happen. Canada was over here also for the G8 and met with the ministers. So there will be strategies for the North American market, including Canada, that will capitalise on not just the trade, the investment, but also the kind of cultural connections that we would have between people here, families here, and people who now live in Canada. So there will be a lot more of those connections in the future.
Just finally, Chair, in terms of the work, very substantial work that has already been done in China, India and Japan, I noticed that Thailand and South Korea are now on the agenda. What work has been done there so far, and what's the future prospects of that being advanced?
I think last year we had 3 visits from senior people in Thailand, including Deputy Prime Minister's Crown Prince of Thailand. So they came over to look at a number of sectors here that they were interested in, including the economy, tourism, and also post-conflict reconstructions. There's been a number of discussions there. And now that we have the international relations strategy approved, we will be putting people into positions where they will be following up on those initial contacts with us. We'll be following up with the embassies to see what else we can do. We've also had a number of visits from the embassy and the ambassador from South Korea. There's an outstanding invitation there to visit South Korea and Thailand. So we want to try and narrow that relationship down to identify a number of areas that would be a benefit to us here as well as to South Korea.
Just in terms of the post-conflict, Chair, if you allow me once more, I had been involved along with Mr Maskey in an exercise in Thailand where I think in the year that we were across, the previous 3 or 4 years, almost 5,000 people had been murdered. So is that post-conflict issues, is that high on the agenda to be dealt with in terms of, or to not dealt with, but to try and assist? Given I don't know what the numbers now are, but certainly 2 or 3 years ago it was heading towards 5,000 people in 3 years.
It was certainly high on the agenda of the government people that we met whenever they came over here, so it's something that I think we do have to follow up on. Now, we recognise that there are issues in Thailand, so we would be working not just with the embassy, with our government, but also with the Foreign Office in terms of how we will follow up on that engagement. But as I said, it was an area that featured very highly whenever they were talking to us and the ministers.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Maskey.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks, Tim and Debbie, for your presentation so far. Could I ask just a wee bit about the international development contributions? Because clearly most of the focus has been on what we can do for people here that we all represent in terms of increasing investment and trade links and supporting and cultural links and so on and so forth. But the international development contribution is actually also a very important responsibility on ourselves, because it's like everything else in life. We're bad, but there's an awful lot of people worse off than what we are. So in what way can we contribute is something I think is important for us also to consider. So can you give us any kind of update on where we are with any particular projects, and I do understand the constraints on ourselves in terms of what we might do, but I do think that we have covered some of it.
Yeah.
We do have actually key experiences at least that we can share, and other contributions to make in the international community for people who are much worse off than what we are.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The international relations strategy also has as an objective the development of an international development strategy and also actions. And taking forward that strategy, we will be in discussions with the all-party group here, as well as some of the aid agencies and other organisations. It's important that we are seen to be global citizens. Many organisations, many countries have visited here in the more recent past and have also asked for senior figures politically and in business to go overseas to help out, and I think it's important if we aspire to have a credible international image that we're also seen to be helping out in many of those regions and many of those countries. We have had a number of discussions with aid agencies and with representatives from the old party group, and we were trying to narrow down regions that we could perhaps have an impact on. And I think that we're going to have to continue with those discussions. Some of the organisations and also government representatives who've come over here on behalf of some of those developing countries and regions have talked about trying to access the expertise that we may have in terms of agriculture, in terms of conflict resolution, and in terms of health issues. So whilst we may be constrained in terms of financial support that could go overseas, we certainly have an expertise that would be of benefit here. So we just need to narrow it down to the regions that we could operate in where we could have an impact, and then how we do that. And we have organisations such as NICO, such as InvestNI that we would be working with, as well as some of the overseas aid organisations and DFID and Irish Aid. So we do think that it's important we have the strategy, we translate the strategy into actions, and we target those regions with the sort of services and skills that we have that will have an impact.
Right, sir, just to be supplementary on that, and thanks for that, and it's good to hear all that. But for me, I mean, obviously, I think we've all agreed that it is as important that we give as well as we get in terms of international relations. You satisfied that the kind of networks that you're discussing with at the moment? Because I'm presuming that people who have came here have a specific request because they've identified here as maybe a resource for themselves. So that's nearly like a no-brainer. We may be able to help them in some shape or form. Every one of the members around this table, in fact the 108 MLAs, might have a good idea about some country in the world or some particular issue. But we have to still find a strategic way of dovetailing what might be people's general interests and what our needs and mutual benefit are as well for the international community. Be happy enough that the way in which you're working will focus down eventually to where we need to be deploying whatever resources we might need to deploy for best impact both ways.
I do think so, yes. We've also discussed international development with the devolved administration in Scotland and Wales, as well as Foreign Office and British Council, about being a small region here, how can we make sure that whatever support we can give will have the sort of impact that we would want to see, rather than just being seen to be part of an overall mix. So it is going to be important to try and identify those regions as well as the organisations that will help us have that impact. And you are absolutely right, it's important that we are seen to be giving something back.
And those considerations also with like the Irish government or other Irish-based agencies, because there's a whole range of agencies in Ireland which have big footprint across the world. So there's clear synergies there which would be beneficial.
There are a lot of organisations who have a lot more expertise in this field than us. Now, some of them have come to talk to us and said, we would like your help in some of these areas. So we'll be taking that forward to see how we can get that help to the organisations. There's also other international organisations who maybe set out priorities and then provide funding to enable organisations or cooperation between regions to go into a developing area to provide support. So we're also talking to those potential funders. So if we can't provide the funding, but we can provide the expertise, we may be able to partner up with organisations who can put money in to back up the work that we are doing.
Okay, thank you.
At 9.3 in the strategy, Tim, you say the Scottish Government has identified Malawi as their area of particular interest and focus. And you want to say that we're working to identify suitable partnership options for us.
Yeah.
I take it when you talk about suitable partnership options, then you're talking about a region or a country.
Yeah.
In the same way Scotland has identified Malawi.
Yeah. Half of the Scottish Government's international development activity is targeted at Malawi, and that's because of a strong historical and cultural link between Malawi and Scotland, and also with people and missionaries who'd gone over there. So those connections were made, and that type of relationship benefited both parties. We would hope that we can do something similar, where we identify a region where there are those connections, historical or cultural, or where there's a connection in relation to having to deal with similar issues that we would have, so that it makes that kind of relationship that has a better chance of success.
Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I'm a member of the All-Party Group on International Development, Tim, and in 1st of March 2011, the Assembly resolved on a cross-party basis the report from the All-Party Group on International Development and called on the First and Deputy First Minister to incorporate its findings into the international relations strategy and to implement its recommendations. Would it be a welcome the positive comments you're making about international development today? And I wanted to ask if it maybe be possible to provide the committee with a written response in terms of how those recommendations are being or will be implemented. Possible, Chair? Yeah.
We have the international development activity here as an objective. We will have a strategy for international development, and that's where we will start to re-engage with the All-Party Group as well as other organisations to take forward not just the recommendations from 2011 but how things have changed and the future operating environment, to see then how we can have an impact not just from the executive's perspective but an NIPLC perspective by targeting the right regions. I think also over the last couple of years, we may have looked at a similar region, but because of developments there are over recent years, that region would no longer be seen as an area where we could have an impact. So we need to see where we can go from here. We would hope to start engaging on with the All-Party Group and with the aid agencies and with others certainly over the next few weeks, and we can write to the committee to maybe outline a timescale as to when we can start that engagement.
Yeah, I'd welcome that. I think it would be useful to get OFMdFM response to those recommendations just to assist that re-engagement. It's okay, Chair.
Alex Atwood.
Sorry I missed your earlier comments, and obviously this is worthwhile and potentially useful. You said in reply to an earlier question that you were, quote, putting people into positions to follow up contact. So could you explain that? If there's going to be an international relations unit in OFMdFM, what is the resource that's going into that office, given the scale and ambition of the international relations strategy?
Well, the final figures are still to be determined based on budgets, but at the moment the international relations team in OFMdFM, or the executive I suppose would be myself along with my other activities, and Debbie and her colleague Anne-Marie McCoy, who would be managing the internal visits. So managing 30 inward visits a year, and many of them high level, means the focus is on what we do with people when we get them here. So I need to get additional resources, perhaps with another manager in OFMdFM, who then does the follow-up with the embassies in London or the consulates or some of those organisations who do come over here. So it will require additional resources. We don't see this being a huge resource, because what we've identified here is there's already work taking place in other departments and other organisations. People will continue to do that work. So our job is really to coordinate, to gather information, collate it, regurgitate that information across departments, and then also by having an overall look at that information, identify where there are opportunities either for us collectively or individual organisations to get further benefits out of those international relations. So there'll be a virtual team across the Executive and the Assembly and InvestNI that will be working on this anyway.
like my own sense is that 2 or 3 people in OFMdFM fulfilling the functions that you do seems somewhat short given the overall ambition, mindful that there is. But why would you be convinced that the resource across all other government departments that exists there already and has existed there for some time is going to be adequate to live up to the ambitions of your 6 or 8 priorities and the 4 or 5 regions in the world where you have named quite specific ambitions and goals? So, why would you conclude? Like, it's probably rhetorical because I think it's a question that is all around us. People, can I ask you, is there an implementation plan with performance indicators in relation to each and all of the conclusions of this report?
Okay. First of all, in relation to the resources that we go with this, because it's a high-level strategy, it builds on the work that other organisations are already doing and the people in those organisations. So where there's good work taking place, we're not going to try and reinvent the wheel there, but we want to build on that success. Now, it may be that once we have all that information collated, that we either identify that there are opportunities that require a certain level of resources to fully exploit that, and that decision will be taken at that time. But the decision may also be that there's sufficient resources there across the network, that if we use them in a slightly different way, we can still get all the benefits that we need in this strategy. So it is something that I think we can do to start off with. We will have additional resources within OFMdFM to help with that coordination and then turning the information into a proactive
that suggests to me that whilst there's great ambition, an implementation plan to realise the ambition is still a work in progress.
Well, we do have an action plan. And that action plan
is that available to us?
The action plan will be available in due course. We're taking it round the other departments so that we're filling in all the gaps. But the action plan identifies, for example, a region and where, say, Invest NI may be very active, where tourism may be very active, but where we may want to do more work by way of, say, education, students or health. So we're filling in the gaps there. Whenever that is available, we can make that, we can send you copies of that. But
could I ask you then, to go back to Mr. Maskey's point, which is a very fair point that we have to give as well as to receive. Why are we not making a financial contribution to international aid? The Scottish Government does. Why are we not making a contribution to international aid?
Well, first of all, we haven't had the international relations strategy that we take forward a policy enabling us to do that. Second of all, I don't think that we are able to spend money outside Northern Ireland unless it's for the benefit of people in Northern Ireland.
The Scottish Government makes a contribution to international aid from its treasury budget.
Each of the devolved administrations does have slightly different policies and powers. But
I don't think they've got slightly different powers when it comes to making contributions to an international aid budget.
But it may be in relation to spending their budget. If they're enabled to spend their budget outside their boundaries under international development activities, they can do that. At the moment, my understanding is that we can spend money outside Northern Ireland for the benefit of people in Northern Ireland. That's something that I can specifically clarify for you, but that has been the practice that we've operated to date. The next thing about
OFMdFM saying that 5% of the SIF budget should be spent on international aid.
Well, the policy of SIF is to target areas of disadvantage in Northern Ireland. So once you've agreed on the policy, then the money has to follow that.
Maybe better spent elsewhere.
Also, in relation to
spend. Come back and advise officially. Is there some differential in the devolution settlement between Scotland and here when it comes to taking forward Mr. Maskey's implicit idea that we should give? That means, and could also mean, give money, because Scotland doesn't. It's part of their programme for government.
Partly to do with powers, but partly also to do with intent. So
I appreciate that, but just come back to us with the question.
Yeah.
Do we have the power? Are we different from Scotland?
Well, we'll come back to there's the power, and then there's whether you can spend the money and whether the executive believes that it should spend the money. But another issue that I would want to raise relating to governance and accountability, we are not going to put money into projects where we don't yet have the expertise or the experience as to how that money would be spent, particularly whenever you are looking outside your boundaries and you have very limited control over line of sight as to where that money goes. So we would have an expertise issue that would have to be addressed as well. Now that's something again that we would take advice from those organisations who have been active in that sector for some time.
And the final question is in that regard. We take advice from organisations who have been active in that sector for some time. Have you been taking advice from the organisations who are active in the let's say, the development world? Is this informed by their advice?
We've met with 8 agencies. We've also met with government organisations and also international organisations that are involved in international development. So yes, we have taken their advice. We have committed some of their advice to actions. But what we've also said is once we get the strategy approved at the executive level, that gives us the policy permission to go out and actually put together a development strategy. So that would be the next move, and that may lead to a lot more activity in the international development field.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm just trying to check the 1998 Act in terms of international obligations. But Tim, yeah, if you could come back to us with the legislative constraints on funding going abroad, that would be useful. And I understand that's the first of a two-part question. The second being the will of the executive, even if the legislation's there.
Could I ask a quickie there of Tim when we have him here? He mentioned Malawi. It's my information that the Scottish Government only work in the south of the country, based down in Blantyre. Central region, northern don't get any help. Do you know if that's right?
I'm not completely certain, Elizabeth. I'll check on that for you.
Interested to know that.
You're confusing Tim for an executive of the Scottish Government.
He's a man of much information.
We work very closely with them. They've been very helpful to us as we've taken forward this work.
Okay. Tim and Debbie, thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay, members, our final substantive briefing today is with regard to Bright Start, the Executive's programme for affordable and integrated childcare. Page 124 of your pack has the clerk's brief. That's followed by correspondence from the Department, which outlines the key first actions. The strategy itself in full begins at page 129 of your electronic packs. Then at table papers on page 28, a briefing from the Department which gives further information on those key first actions. And at page 39 of the table pack, a letter from the Department regarding the planned announcement tomorrow by the junior ministers of the launch of a grant scheme which will support school-age childcare services, breakfast clubs, after-school clubs, summer schemes, that sort of thing, which is aimed at children aged 4 to 14. And we welcome to the committee Martin Tyrrell and Dennis McMahon.
Chair.
And over to you, Dennis.
Hey, Chair. I'll just make a few short opening remarks just to say thank you for inviting us along. Very happy to come along and talk through the briefing paper and any other questions or issues that you want to raise. The Basically, there's two overarching aims of all of this. Really, one is about improving children's health, well-being and life opportunities. So that's one of the reasons why this fits within the Delivering Social Change framework. And the other side of that is to try to improve levels of economic activity and to allow parents an opportunity to use childcare as a way of getting into work or getting into other forms of economic activity. Those are equally important, those two aspects. There are a range of measures in Bright Start, and obviously, as you mentioned, the first measure is for 7,000 school-aged childcare places. And really the aim of this is to begin to meet some of the demand that we believe is there from the research that we have. Because from the figures that we have, it looks as if there's around about 19 children for every place, every childcare place. 75% of super output areas have no school-aged childcare provision. So this is about trying to meet some of that gap in demand, or between demand and supply, rather. And it's really an opportunity also to assess how effective that approach is. It's important to say 7,000 school-aged childcare places is a big provision, but it certainly would not meet the full level of demand that's out there. So I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Okay, well, the Deputy Chair has indicated immediate interest.
It was unintentional, but I'm happy to. Dennis, can you say, I think this is childcare crisis, one of the single biggest issues facing families in Northern Ireland. Can you say something about how the UK government childcare subsidy has been taken into consideration by OFMdFM in launching this scheme, and how it will apply to families in Northern Ireland?
Yeah, the proposal for, I think it's up to £2,000 assistance per annum with the cost of childcare. That's a revision of the existing scheme whereby parents can avail of vouchers to help with the cost of childcare. Currently, we'll be asking all providers who receive grants under the school-aged childcare grant scheme to promote the uptake of both the voucher scheme and the tax credits assistance with the cost of childcare as part of the conditions of their grant. They will have to undertake to promote existing financial assistance, and when the financial assistance regime changes, or if it changes in favour of the new system, which I think is dated for after the general election in 2015, then that will be taken into account as part of this grant scheme. So basically, whatever financial assistance is available with the cost of childcare, we would be expecting assisted providers to promote that assistance, and in addition, our managing agent will also be required to promote available financial assistance.
It's a welcome provision, but I think it's exacerbated the complicated nature of the framework of assistance available to families across Northern Ireland, and I think the information and awareness raising needs to extend well beyond just the areas of social disadvantage that you'll be targeting through the school-aged childcare grant scheme. One of the key actions is for a social media application. Are you aware that Early Years has recently launched a social media application to assist with choosing childcare in early years?
Yes, we're aware of that. The two apps were, I think, in development pretty much side by side for a time, but the Department of Health and Social Services are leading on the development of our app, and this reflects enhanced information that's been made available through the Family Support NI website. Childcare search facility on the FSNI website has been upgraded to enable parents to make a more refined and detailed search of childcare facilities in their area, and this will be reflected in the new app. The app will basically provide the same information via mobile phones.
And you're also hoping to do a full advertising campaign as well in relation to all this information?
Well, initially in the first year in 2014-15, the Department of Health and Social Services, which is taking forward that particular first action, it will be promoting through the Family Support NI website for example, financial assistance, it will be using that promotionally and also using the app and social media. But the full media campaign, that will be taken forward later, conditional upon the Executive's agreement that that is a good use of resource.
I would argue that's more urgent than some of the other methods that you're taking forward. But the school-age childcare grant scheme, then it's services for 4 to 14-year-olds, incorporating things like breakfast clubs, after-schools clubs in disadvantaged areas, and it's going to be £15 million worth of grants over 3 financial years, 14, 15, 15, 16, 17, 18. About £5 million per year. Your research shows that there's around 230,000 4 to 14-year-olds, and currently only around 12,000 places. SIB has done research to show that the cost of a social economy model to deliver one place is around 3,400 per child per year. So I think with the £5 million per year, that equates somewhere around 1,470 places per year, in addition to the 12,000 in a context of 230,000 children. Is that anywhere near enough? And how is it going to assist families who aren't deemed to be in socially disadvantaged areas, in addition to what you are going to help?
Well, I think there's a couple of aspects there. The first thing I would say is, although the figures are up to, in fact, potentially it could be up to 17 million, depending on the demand and so on. But that will depend very much on what happens when the scheme is initially rolled out.
Well, it is 17 million, but 1 million of that's management agent, and the rest of it's registration, so it's 15 million.
Although initially we're starting with the 12 million that we have, and we're going to be potentially working up to that and building additional resources for that, as it said earlier on at the committee. I think the issue though around that, it's absolutely correct that this will not meet all of the demand. This is about trying to improve a significant gap in the market. It's about really trying to identify those areas that are most in need and those people that are most in need initially, and to support the provision of additional, or to support the development of additional provision. So that, because the need will be greatest there, both in terms of promoting economic activity and in terms of providing good facilities to improve children's health, wellbeing and life opportunities. Part of that, as you've said, is capital, and the aim will be to see if we can grow the market overall. It's not, and there is a real issue there, obviously, about making sure that this is done in a sensitive way, which is one of the reasons why we're doing this through the childcare partnerships, so that we grow the market and don't damage the existing market, and that's what we're aiming to do, that's what ministers are aiming to do.
At one of the last sessions, officials suggested that of the current £12 million budget, which I think was years 11 to 15, as much as £5 million might go underspent. Is that £5 million being included in the amount of money that is being advertised today in terms of 17 million?
All of the remaining childcare budget will be going into that, and at this point in time, that's £9.5 million is remaining. Originally, when we spoke to you before, we talked about those £2.5 million had been spent, and I think there was further resources have been committed. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. To date, we've spent £2.5 million we've allocated £2.5 million from the 12 million that was originally available. So the balance of that will be employed to fund the first years of this grant scheme.
What is that balance?
£9.5 million. 12 less £2.5 million. It's not
9.5 of the 17 is an underspend from 11-15 then?
Well, what has happened is that when we got moving on developing the key first actions, the resource was held to be utilised for those key first actions. So previous to that, we'd been taking applications for assistance from departments and applying resource to successful projects that met the criteria. But once we had a childcare strategy in development with spending needs, then the resource was diverted towards the childcare strategy itself. The function of the 12 million was to be supportive of the development of the childcare strategy, so now it is supporting the first phase of the childcare strategy.
Okay. One other important question. And I welcome additional places in our area in any format, but what consideration has been given to the capacity of the private sector to provide additional affordable childcare places in areas of social disadvantage, or indeed for any families across Northern Ireland?
I mean, I think it's important to say that the private sector providers are a key element of the market, and certainly the intention of this is not to displace or to damage the market, the existing market that's there, but to grow it. Because again, the sense was that there's a need, there's a much greater need than there is supply at the moment. So there has to be a way of filling that market, or filling that gap. Ministers took the view that the resources should be focused very much on social economy models. That doesn't mean to say people who are providing on a private sector basis could not apply using a social economy model for this. Or it doesn't mean, for example, that an existing business couldn't set up a non-profit wing or element to be able to provide facilities through it. So it's not that there's
Are you making that clear at the launch tomorrow?
Good point.
Have you made that clear? Have you engaged with the private sector?
We've engaged in consultation, we've engaged with all sectors, and we've made it clear that this scheme is open to private sector firms that wish to adopt a social economy model. That's been clearly stated in all of the publicity. To date, we haven't actually launched the scheme formally, but that advice will be provided.
The only issue with that is the fact that it's on a social economy model basis, which means that it's a non-profit basis. So, and it's important to be very clear about that. For example, if I was a childcare provider, I had a property, and I was saying, well, okay, I'm going to basically use this property to be able to provide additional childcare places, and I bid for a grant. That could be problematic because then the money's going into building profits in the form of the increasing value of my property. So
you could restrain what way
there are ways
the sector could utilise the funds. I realise you have to move on, sir. My last point is, I mean, the main aim has to be surely to increase places across the board.
Yes, absolutely, on a non-profit basis.
It's pretty concerning to hear today that around £9 million in the last 4 years has basically not been used to do that. And I think we need to hear more in terms of how exactly the private sector could be being used to quickly and more urgently deal with this than the department has been able to do up to now. Thanks, Chair.
I want to expand on this, Chris. Sorry. Dennis, am I right in saying your definition for the purposes of this exercise of a social economy is, quote, a business with primarily social objectives whose surpluses are principally reinvested for that purpose in the business or in the community, rather than being driven by the need to maximise profit for shareholders?
Yes.
So, principally reinvested. So you allow for an element of profit being used not for reinvestment.
I mean, that's the definition that we're using.
Yeah, that's that definition has been. That isn't necessarily how we will be assessing applications. Applications will be assessed basically on a one-by-one basis to see if the proposed project fits with the social economy model. And we'll be taking advice from, for example, the Social Economy Foundation and the Invest Northern Ireland.
What is a social economy model as opposed to
a social economy? A social economy business is one that that invests its surpluses for the purpose of the business.
All its or principally?
I'm not sure why the word principally appears. It's most of its surpluses.
Principally, mostly. The distinction is between exclusively and principally stroke mostly.
I'd be guided by Invest Northern Ireland and other specialists in the social economy area on what constitutes a social economy model.
I mean the one thing
I thought you indicated that the definition I've just read out is the definition you are using.
It's the definition that appears in the overview, which is to guide applicants, but it's not necessarily the definition that it's the definition that appears in the guidance. But when we are assessing applications, they will be assessed on a one-by-one basis.
I mean, the definition is, as Martin says, the definition is in the guidance. That definition. Right. The issue is the principle is that ministers were very keen that the resources would go into those areas most in need, to those people most in need, and that they would not be used to create profits for private sector businesses. That was basically that's the principle that we're operating to, okay. But that is the definition.
Well, let's say I am a private sector provider, and I am interested in drawing down some of your funding for this SAC initiative, and I am prepared to look at running it as a social economy model.
Yes.
My question to you is, define principally.
Well, I think we'd have to look at that in more detail, to be honest with you. I think that's, well, it's the thing about it is any set of criteria that you use for any grant scheme will always have a level of judgment associated with them, and that if that's the definition, then that's the starting point for the panel to meet and to discuss the different applications coming in.
I say to you, I reinvest 51% of my surpluses. That's the majority. But does that mean I'm principally reinvesting?
I don't think we can't provide you with a hard and fast definition of that. I think what would be fair to say is if you're investing 51% of your profits back into the business, the enterprise, for the purposes of providing childcare places, and somebody else is providing 85% reinvestment, then obviously that will be one of the factors that will be taken into account in terms of prioritising one of the applications over the other one.
What I'm hearing, Dennis, is there is a definition, but you can't explain to me how that will be applied, particularly. So you're saying if I'm reinvesting 51%, I will lose out to somebody who's reinvesting 52%.
Well, I think what we'd have to do is apply all of the criteria, and if that's one of the criteria, then that would be one of the ones that we would take into account in terms of deciding between applications.
See, early years argue that this isn't appropriate in terms of private sector providers. Let me quote a little before them. The sector is one that does not receive any form of traditional grant aid funding support, and is characterised by husbands and wives, sisters and family members that have set up and developed their own small to medium-sized businesses locally, often inspired by their own childcare needs, offering flexibility and a valuable service to the communities they serve in allowing parents to either find or remain in employment. Now, these small to medium-sized enterprises act as a significant employer themselves, employing currently 4,500 full and part-time staff. Fees charged are reinvested in staff costs, training, regulation, rates and overheads, capital and high-quality provision. If the type of subvention support envisaged by Bright Start Key First Actions was made available to this sector, allowing a wider, more mixed range of providers to participate, fees in the private sector could be significantly reduced, enhancing affordability for parents and allowing, allowing wider access. Is that a reasonable argument?
I mean, it's the point about the private sector providers being a key part of the market, which certainly nobody could argue with, and I think it's important to say that this is obviously ministers' policy decisions are based on a principle, and the principle is not at all conflicting with the importance of the private sector as part of the market. The point they're making is that I think the point that ministers are making in making that decision is that they want the resources to go primarily to those areas and those people most in need, and that they do not want the resources to go into private sector profits.
Is that not discriminating against the private sector?
Well,
yes, it is.
Well, I mean, I think it's simply reflecting that there are many different examples of areas where public sector provision is supplemented or is funded by government because there's a failure in the market. In this particular case, there's a failure in the market because the demand doesn't meet, or the supply doesn't meet the demand. And really what ministers are saying is that we need to ensure that the resources are going into non-profit making organisations so that that gap in the market can be addressed.
I tell you what my concern is, Dennis. It's displacement. You know, Invest Northern Ireland like to back companies that export. They don't like to back companies which are local because of the fear of displacement. So in other words, you're a bakery on one side of town, I'm a bakery on the other side of town. Their fear is if they support me, I grow at your expense. So basically they just displace the business from you to me.
Get money in, get a job.
And surely the fear with this scheme is that you will displace from the private sector into social economy.
I think it would be a really important point that displacement is to be avoided at all costs.
So how do you do that?
Well, the way that this is that the mechanism that will be used for this scheme is to go out through the health and social care partnerships. The childcare partnerships, which are supported by the Health and Social Care Board. The childcare partnerships have a mixture of different types of providers on them, and they have a lot of local market intelligence. And one of the things that we want to avoid is a situation where we simply allocate places out to different areas in a very mechanistic way that doesn't take into account local knowledge and a local understanding of which providers are already there. So that's the idea is to ensure that as far as possible the model is sensitive to existing provision so that it's not across existing provision.
But if I'm a parent and I'm currently using a private sector provider at X per hour, and I become aware that there is a social economy alternative around the corner at X minus subsidy per hour, and I'm going to apply to the social economy model.
And obviously,
I'm going to displace.
And obviously, there's a number of factors in there. So, for example, that would mean that this should not be allocating to, if you've got a private sector provider and they're providing places at a certain amount per hour, you would not, and we would certainly not expect this scheme to promote another provider around the corner offering the same service at the same level. What you would expect is, it may be that you are a private sector provider offering a service in a particular area. It may be that in a 20-mile radius there are very few other providers around. It may be a case of that there's a geographical distance or geographical barrier to people using childcare. It may be that you've got a private sector provider who's providing a place at a higher cost. Yes. But if it's a significantly, I mean that's the issue. If it's at a high enough rate, then there's a danger that existing parents may not be able to use it.
Yes, exactly.
But therefore, what you're doing is, so that means that you could have. We're talking about one particular scenario here, but you could have a private sector provider that's providing childcare at a higher rate than
that's most you're now making my argument.
Most parents can afford.
Crazy.
But that doesn't mean to say. But then that means that the provision, there's a gap in provision. Are we content to allow a situation where parents are not able to access? That's the minister's point.
But I've just heard you say if there's a provider in the private sector, you'll put some sort of like 20-mile radius around it to protect
what I'm saying is you'd made the point that
was in.
What the point I'm making is there's a number of different factors in there. One is distance. You've talked about round the corner. There are a lot of areas where there are no providers at all. So there are gaps in provision where there's no provision.
Yeah, but focused on displacement here.
Okay. In terms of displacement, the question is, and it's not a right or wrong answer. Ultimately, it's not something that you can put into a simple. It's not really an administrative issue. It's more of a policy issue. But there's I suppose a policy or political issue about in a case where you've got a private sector provider and a number of parents are unable to access childcare provision because that's the only provider and because their costs are too high. And in that case, what are your options?
To bring the price down.
Yes.
is one, to my mind,
That's
perfectly
correct.
valid option,
That's
which has
absolutely
been
right.
excluded by this policy.
And there are a number of ways of bringing the price down. One way of bringing the price down is to provide grants to supplement existing provision. Another way is to promote competition in areas where maybe a provider is not able to provide at a certain level. I'm not saying that either of them is right or wrong. I'm just saying that that's and in that particular scenario, if you did end up with another provider being provided grant funding, then it would be to promote competition effectively.
I do fear displacement. I feel this is discriminating against the private sector. Chris, you wanted back in?
Yeah. So is it? I hope here is to drive down costs.
Well, it's about quality.
Is there not a potential you put other providers out of business?
It's about the provision of high quality, affordable, integrated childcare provision, and that's what it's about. So it's about really recognising that there is not enough of that provision, and that there has to be a way of trying to grow more provision. It's recognising the fact that it's not about a single level of demand which you divide up between existing providers and new providers. It's about reflecting the fact that there's a whole range of unmet demand out there, that we need to find ways of supporting additional provision so that it can meet that demand.
You mentioned another option being grants to help with cost. Is that being considered as another rollout? And that would certainly seem to be the approach that the UK government is taking in terms of trying to increase the money in families' pockets to be able to meet cost.
The policy decision is that the resources are to go primarily into providing services and not into profits, and that's the policy decision.
Okay, there are many members want to come in. One last one at this stage from me, Dennis. At the moment, for 4 to 14-year-olds, there's only one place for every 19 children. Okay, and obviously we all agree we want to address that. So, in what financial year will we have moved from 1 in 19 to 1 to 1 full provision?
Well, that's one of the questions which the longer term, which the strategy will aim to address.
There's no answer at this
we don't
stage.
know. We don't have an answer. And to be fair, it is a huge issue. I mean, if you're talking about potentially, 100,000 places, 7,000 places is not going to do more than meet some of the most urgent needs and provide the basis for looking at wider measures that we can take.
Okay. George Rollins.
Thank you, Chair. Just to confirm, Dennis, any financial interventions would be primarily in areas of deprivation and social enterprise, areas to ensure value for money. Is that correct?
That's correct. That's the
you're saying.
Go ahead.
Not
apologies.
just deprivation areas, also focusing on rural areas.
Rural, yeah.
So we're going to try and create up to 1,000 new places in rural areas in providers using the social economy model, and also in the schools estate, using the schools estate as a location for school-age childcare provision. We're hoping to create between 2,000 and 3,000 places there, and those will be across the board, not just in disadvantaged areas, not even primarily in disadvantaged areas. So there's a mix of provision, a mix of target groups for this initiative.
Rural areas would definitely come into the equation.
Oh yes, definitely, yeah.
That's grand. Thanks.
Okay, Donald McGann.
Okay, thank you for your presentation, and I want to welcome this initiative. I know of many people out there in the community that have been waiting a long time on this, and there's been a lot of words used like discrimination and displacement. Well, that's what rural areas have been going through for the last number of years. And also as well, I know that some of the private sector childcare facilities, there are women travelling 18 miles plus to use some of those facilities because it's the nearest to them. So they'll welcome the opportunity that there will be funding going into rural areas. Some of these private childcare providers also sit in neighbourhood renewal areas. None of those people can use them because they're not affordable. So again, these different models will be welcomed in our community. I raised a question with Minister Michelle O'Neill because there's, I think, a total of 2,000 places going into rural areas. That if the childminder startup places are not fully used up, would you give consideration opposition to moving those places to the social enterprise model, because I'm picking up that that would actually be quite a popular concept in rural areas, so she's going to feed that into her business case, so I'm flagging that up. But I do want to welcome this initiative. And I know rural people out there who I've spoke to are delighted. And I have to say, I've been quite disappointed in some of the very disparaging comments that I've heard from the childcare sector, who have been critical of potential monies going into rural areas, who say, well, you know, by putting money into rural areas, you're putting money into places that are not sustainable. Well, for me, if you knew anything about a rural community, you would know that's the way it is. And I'm somebody that lives in a rural community, and it is difficult to get numbers. So I just want to thank you for your presentation and welcome the good work that has been done.
Alex Abbott.
First of all, the principle of money going into childcare is very welcome. If it's 17 million, that's very welcome. And nobody should deny any of that. Nobody will. And secondly, the principle of monies then going into social economy is something that I, in principle, support. 5% of all jobs in the north are social economy, believe it or believe it not. It should become a preferred model, or certainly a model treated with equality when it comes to provision of services generally, which is not what our government does, because more and more and more central procurement is tendering on the basis of the big and the brash, not the small, the medium, or the social economy. And there's very good models of social economy and small and medium out there that are now in jeopardy, including in terms of health and community care, because of this tendency or direction of government procurement to favour the big and the bold, or the big and the brash. And we are all going to suffer because of that, because big organisations will take the work, subcontract, and take their profit and do very little. So if we're going to go into social economy, let's get serious about it. But in getting serious about it, you have to do it wisely. And what has been rolled out here is a model that will have consequences that are not going to be good. That's the consequence. So I think this is the point on the basis of the conversation so far. I think you need to go and take urgent advice, both legal and political, about what you have said to the committee today, and how what you may announce tomorrow can be reconciled with what is explicitly in the policy. So the Hansard will confirm that, Dennis, you said that it was good that money was going to go into disadvantaged areas, and that it was the view of ministers, quote, that it should not go into the private sector, unquote. That's the evidence you've given to the committee today. Yet you didn't dispute the views of the chair when he quoted what the policy laid down by government is as to what is a social enterprise approach. And to remind you, it is a business with primarily social objectives whose surpluses are principally reinvested for that purpose. That's the policy. That's different from what you've said.
Well, if I said that...
No.
Well, okay.
You've said it.
No,
and there's a tension between what you've said.
No, I'm happy to accept that I've said what I've said.
And what the policy is. And when it comes to this, when it comes to the rollout of this scheme, when it comes to the assessments that you will have to make in terms of who gets awarded monies or grants, the assessment has to be what the chair said it has to be, principally reinvested for that purpose in the business or in the community. Okay, that's going to be the test. It's not what you said is that ministers don't want to go into the private sector. Those words do not exclude the private sector. I think you need to go and get policy and legal advice in that regard.
No,
could I ask you on the basis?
Well, can I answer, please? Sorry. I'm happy to accept that point. If I haven't put it as accurately as I should have done, it's private sector profits. That's the issue that ministers are concerned about. It's not about the private sector. And if I've said that, then that's a mistake, and I shouldn't have said that.
Well, whatever about the private sector profits, you, the ministers and everybody will be judged by what is in the policy. And the policy is businesses whose with primarily social objectives, which childcare, in my view, are, whose surpluses are principally reinvested for that purpose, which in my view is the vast majority of private providers. And the vast majority of private providers are not people who, in the terms of the policy, are driven by the need to maximise profits for shareholders, unquote. So it seems to me that we need urgent clarification at a policy and legal level as to what is or is not captured by those words, because in my view, and that's why I'd like to see all of the research that has been conducted by OFMdFM, not just all of the SIB stuff, but also the RSM McClure stuff. It's my view that whilst there will be big providers out there, and they may or may not be motivated by profit, the vast majority of private sector providers are, first of all, a business with primarily social objectives, and secondly, are working at such tight margins that there's no profit or very little more profit, and that the vast majority of that profit goes into the scheme. On the basis of the policy, they qualify. But the word has gone out that they don't. And that tension has to be resolved. In my view, it has to be resolved before any announcement is made. But we need to have certainty about what is or is not included. Now, on the basis of what I've been told, the intention is that the private sector will not be included. I think that's a false approach. I think that will result in good businesses providing a good service in areas of disadvantage as well as other places, potentially going to the wall, and all the best practice of that being lost. I think that's a false policy, and that's a policy that needs to be corrected. But what we need to know today, and what we need to know between now and tomorrow, is are those type of businesses captured by that policy? That's the written policy. That's what we're all going to be judged by. Are they captured or are they not? If they're not captured, then I think the policy should be reviewed urgently. If they are captured, then let us say that they are. On the basis of what the policy is and what you said today, I think there's a tension, Dennis, that you have to urgently work yourselves through.
Well, I mean, I think for the point of clarity, just at this stage, it's worth just reiterating that the policy is the policy. I mean, that's the as stated. And if I've given the impression that the private sector would not be able to apply for this, that was not the intention. The intention is that this is about ensuring that resources do not go into private sector profits. That's a different issue. But I think it's important to say that the funding decisions will not be made tomorrow. Funding decisions will be made on the basis of the policy. And that's basically the best clarification I can give, is that the policy is there.
Okay. The only comment to make, because I think this probably has been considered properly, go back to what you said in the Hansard. In questioning from the chair as to what was or was not captured by a social enterprise, you said, quote, we'd look at that in more detail. And then you said you can't provide a hard and fast definition, unquote. And then you differentiated a company that reinvests 75% compared to 85% of their profits, saying that the one that reinvests 85% might be eligible for grant. I think 24 hours before an announcement is made, that's not very certain for us, or for the social economy sector, or for the private sector. And I think that given that ambiguity, and I hope that the grant scheme is available for the private sector, but given the ambiguity, I'd be very cautious about launching this, given the ambiguity and uncertainty that is in this room, and it's from your word, from your mouth.
Okay, Alex Maskey.
Thank you, Chairman. I think we're starting to get into a legal argument here, and as far as the last I heard, I don't think anybody in this room, including Mr. Atwell, is a practising solicitor. So, as far as I'm concerned, I think the project's a good project. I think it's based on appropriate principles. It's unusual that we always hear the private sector saying that they can do things better and cheaper, more effective, and to some extent that can be correct. And as I read it, this is not against the private sector at all. we know that the funding in this particular programme will not meet all of the needs, so you would assume that the private sector will still be well able and well disposed to expand their businesses. Certainly given the demand out there, you expect that a number of them would and have been able to do that, and that's good and important as part of the mix. But as far as I'd be concerned, I think that I would like to see, I think all of us would assume and understand the social economies to be organisations which are designed to deliver particular services. Most good social economy projects actually create more employment and to provide services at a reasonable point of access or cost per unit. So I think it's a good way of using our public money. We do discriminate on a whole range of policies here. There's reductions in rates for particular sections of industry, for example, manufacturing industry. And that's a good thing to do, because the government here has decided it needs to try to strategically support particular parts of the economy here, and that is as should be. But they're all political decisions which are taken. So I want to see the programme working. I want to see it work well. I think, like everybody else, we are concerned that it is taking some time to deliver. Hopefully, this is we're at the point of coming to fruition. Some of this. So I wish it well, and I don't want to see any particular business at all displaced. Far from it. I want to see more people getting access to appropriate levels of affordable and accessible childcare. It has to be costly, particularly in rural areas or when you start to deal with particular children with particular needs. All of that is going to be much more costly because it needs greater professional expertise and support. So I just think that I think there may have been a bit of confusion put in there earlier on around this argument around principle and so on and so forth. But my understanding of the social economy project that it is not there for private profit making. I'm not against that. I'm just simply saying this programme is designed and targeted to provide social economy projects with the wherewithal to try to make sure that an awful lot more children and families get access to affordable childcare. So on that basis I welcome it and look forward to continuing reports to see how it has been rolled out in practice. And I think Martin himself made the point early on that each one of these applications will be dealt with on its own merit. And on that basis I would expect there to be a whole range of people or families or small businesses which will be able to apply, as providing one would assume that able to meet the needs of a social economy concept.
Okay, thanks, Alex. Jimmy Spratt.
Thank you, Chair. And I too want to welcome tomorrow's announcement. I think in terms of rural areas, but for me, inner city urban areas as well, where this will be very welcome. The fact that there's thousands of extra places going to be created, but still not enough. I think that's the key point. There's still not going to be enough at the end of the day. I personally can't see how that can affect, if it's after school clubs or if it's done through social economy in inner city areas, in some of the areas where government has been putting a fair amount of money in. Well, then that's welcome news. But I think there's room for everybody. And I think this creation actually assists in terms of that. The one thing that concerns me slightly is 3 years. I suspect that you can't give any guarantees beyond 3 years.
No, obviously.
But, are we entering into a programme that will continue to roll beyond 3 years? Given that I assume that successful, it will run on, and the government will want to provide those places at affordable for people who maybe at this minute in time can't afford it, and certainly can't afford to go to some of the private enterprises that are available. So I think it's welcome news. I think it's an addition. I hear the legal arguments. We often hear legal arguments in this committee, but I suspect those legal arguments go not much further than hot air.
Stephen Mitry.
Yeah, thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation as well. I think Jimmy has probably covered the points that I wanted to raise, but they were, what is going to happen after 3 years if some of the projects are not sustainable? And again, I would come back to the point that was made in relation to the private sector businesses that are there, that let's hope they're going to be there after 3 years' time. And I hope that they will have an opportunity also to avail the funding that's going to be out there. There is a demand for extra places, we all realise that, but I hope it's not going to be one sector is just going to be penalised. As we move forward here, there's got to be a balance. There's room for both, I hope.
So I would definitely just reinforce that point that the overarching aim here is to try to improve the level of provision, and that is certainly not going to be achieved at the cost of any one sector. That would just not work. So the aim is to grow the sector and not to grow different types of provision, and not to damage one element of it. And I mean, in terms of the long-term sustainability, obviously we can't talk about the longer-term funding position, but it is clearly, this issue is only going to get bigger, because there are going to be more people seeking to avail of childcare to enter into work, hopefully as the economy grows. And obviously, this is a huge priority also in terms of making sure that children have the best chance in life. So I couldn't see this being anything other than a continuing priority for government.
Thank you. Time will tell.
Okay, and Martin, a few quick fire. Well, it may not be possible, but we'll see how quickly we can get through these. The final complete strategy, are you still on course to finalise and publish this calendar year?
The aim is by March 2015.
Yeah, 2015, March 2015.
Okay.
Financial year.
Sorry.
The financial year.
Financial year. All right. Okay. End of this financial year.
Yes.
Okay. Is it correct that the 40 SAC providers currently assisted by the department will no longer receive funding after September?
That's correct. Yes, unless they successfully apply under the new scheme. They're perfectly entitled to apply for the new scheme, but they will have to take their chance against the selection criteria.
Key actions 3 and 4, rural childcare. Could you tell us a little bit more about the initial evaluation of the 2011 Rural Childminder Initiative?
I believe that evaluation has just begun or is on the point of beginning, so there's nothing to report from that as yet, but that will inform the development of the successor, which will be part of the Bright Start strategy.
Okay. Advertising. We previously encouraged the department to go for advertising. I think it's Department of Health is taking it forward. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah.
Yes.
Will that be timely?
Certainly the initial promotional work will be done through social media, through the website and through the app, and also through advertisements in, for example, Northern Ireland for Kids magazine. But subsequently there will be a promotional campaign and full media campaign in 14-15, I think, so the next financial year. And that will be timely. That will coincide with peaks in the key first actions.
All right.
I said 14, 15, 15, 16. Oh, that's okay.
It's 14, 15.
And 14, 15.
14, 15 is when
which starts
soon.
Very, very soon.
Yes.
Okay. But it could be, 9 months before we see the advertising campaign. Have you any idea when in 14, 15 it will come?
I would have thought later in 2014 is when we'll see the advertising campaign.
Okay.
And specific content will be developed over those 9 months.
Right. And in terms of managing Bright Start, has the Childcare Strategy Management Forum been set up?
In effect, there was a project board which is cross-departmental that has been managing the development of the strategy, and to develop that into the managing forum, that has taken on some new members, some additional departments, and also the Childcare Partnership representative is now participating in the forum.
So how often has it met?
It meets monthly, and will continue to do so.
So how many meetings to date?
Since it expanded from, I think, 4 or 5 meetings.
But I mean, prior to that, we'd been having monthly meetings of the smaller project board, but which is the core of it.
With regard to children with disabilities, SIB said there was limited up-to-date information. Estimates 35 children per 1,000 under 16. Are these figures robust enough for you to incorporate in a strategy, or do you need to do more research?
We're aware that there's a need for more provision, and the focus of the strategy has been in addressing the need for provision by small grant scheme to childcare providers to help them adapt their premises, acquire equipment, etc., and also training initiatives. Those have been very successful. Reports from DHSSPS have been, there's been good take-up of both grants and training.
But in terms of quantifying the need, Martin, are you basing it on that 35%?
Initially, yes, and also on consultation responses and engagement with the childcare sector.
So you're content to use this, although SIB say there's limited up-to-date information?
It's the only information we have at present. We're aware of need, and we try to meet that need through policy.
It's the only information available at the moment, and you are not seeking other sources of information?
At the minute, there are other priorities in the childcare strategy beyond information gathering.
It's something we could look at. I mean, I think...
Sorry, there are other priorities.
Well,
I mean, these are children with disabilities.
Sorry, just to
keep not the gathering of statistics. That's not the priority. The priority is addressing the need for childcare provision for children with a disability, and that's where the strategy.
So our focus has been using the money. There is clearly a need, clearly a huge demand, and the question is, regardless of we need to get more research to define the full extent of that demand. But in the meantime, the focus is on trying to meet some of that demand. That's what we're trying to. Sorry, that's just.
Thank you for clarifying. Okay, Martin, Dennis. Okay. Thank you both very much indeed.
Thank you very much.
That's it.
Okay, members, that's about it. Before we move on, Bronwyn, do you want to say any more about discrimination in rural areas?
Discrimination? Well, Chair, I was making a comment in relation to the point that yourselves were making earlier on about discrimination against the private sector.
Chair, can I just make a comment on that? The focus of today, and from my point of view, understanding, was the grant scheme for school-age childcare. There are additional aspects of Bright Start which are focused on rural provision, which I imagine everybody here would give their wholehearted support to. So if there's any confusion in terms of any underplay of the need to tackle lack of provision in rural areas, then that certainly wasn't my intention in any shape or form.
I don't think anybody.
I don't think that was anyone's intention, but the point that we're getting close to there, and it didn't really come out, is that there are a great number of small 2 or 3 housewives or other ladies who've been forming small groups to do this work for years. And under this concoction, because you can see how confused they are, I'm just glad that we do have Hansard. Those sort of people will be put out of business. Now, that's not right. This is not as if some big outfit, with hundreds of employees. These are 2 or 3 people all over the place. In Dungannon, for example, I used to live there. They're working away to doing that job. I think it'd be grossly unfair if they were put out of business by this one-sided and confused approach.
Well, Chairman, I know some projects, some people who, and it is essentially around family. And I know that there are now grandchildren going to some of the same childminders. And I wouldn't want to see them go into business, and I don't really expect them to go into business. But at the same time, you do have to question sometimes the cost of some of these things. Because some of these things are run in somebody's house.
Yeah.
And that's all fine, as long as they meet all of the criteria and all the needs. Huge amount of money.
Well, that's why it should be wrong to have.
You said yourself, if you're putting that amount of public money into something, it would double the number of children who can get the access.
But Alec, it's the opposite to that.
No, well, I think, see, because for me the amount of support given will not meet the need.
That's another issue. No reason for
you're
right, but that's not an issue.
So, when I made my own points, I just hope that I don't expect there to be a displacement, and I wouldn't want either to be a displacement.
Bound to be.
It's all about a distance.
Chair, I would feel the same way, but at the same time, as long as the provision for both urban and rural, at the end of the day, the rural community seems to be more isolated from time to time and depending where you are as well. So that'd be my point.
Well, I think we have valid differences probably around the table. I think what we could all agree on as a final point is we don't want a scheme which puts millions of pounds of taxpayers' money into shareholders' pockets.
No.
Gentlemen and ladies and members, page 181, Forward Work Programme. Any comments? I'd say that the committee team have been liaising well with the Department Assembly Liaison Officer on developing a work programme to the end of 13-14, and we'll have a revised programme in the pack next week. So if you're content to hold any comments until then.
Chair, to say briefly, the umbrella organisation Children in Northern Ireland conducted a consultation with a wide group of organisations around the delivering social change for children and young people strategy. It might be an umbrella organisation worth considering, taking evidence from when the time is appropriate in relation to that particular strategy.
Okay. Any other business?
There was just one matter. I'm not sure. I don't want to labour this point, but I just noticed, and I'm sorry for missing the start of the meeting, so I didn't come to this item, but on the matters arising, matters outstanding committee issues. I see the MLK is not on that, but I note the note which says anything under that doesn't have the due response date doesn't be included in that. I just want to make sure that there's no underlying, because it was on at the last meeting if I remember correctly, so it is still an outstanding issue insofar as it's a programme for government commitment, which is unavoidable and inescapable, and people here can't ignore that. Whatever is happening with it, at the point. So I only want to make that wee point. It doesn't appear on the outstanding committee issues, but it still is an outstanding programme for government commitment. So I'm only, that needs to be reflected somewhere.
The reason why, sorry, Chair, the reason why it's not on the outstanding issues is because it was a response to the letter, and that essentially just tracks responses to letters. So we had a response to say that obviously there's no political decision on that, and that's why it's not on there.
Right. So it remains an issue, but it's not overdue in terms of a letter.
Yeah, no, I thought that, but I just wanted to make sure it was clear.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks, Les. Thank you, Sean.
No, I think we're all keen to find out what the resolution is going to be. Any other business, and we meet again Wednesday the 2nd of April, 2 p.m, room 30. Thank you very much.
This is the Northern Ireland